Okay, yeah, perfect. So this is the main interface when you enter pattern inspiration. You have filter lines. This is a filter line where you can say, is there a topic you would like me to use? Anybody would like to any kind of topic of interest?
Maybe some kind of medical device. We get a lot of questions about that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what exactly.
Medical device.
Heart stent or some, I don't know, diabetes
Heart stent.
monitor.
Very good.
So
very good. So imagine that we start with heart stents. We have heart and stent. First thing you do, if you put heart and stent, you get the patterns which have both the word heart and stent in there. Now, we might move towards heart stent, for example, and only when they mention heart stent, then you'll have a smaller group because it will be only the patterns that mention heart stent in 2 words. Or we could say, not everybody will say heart stent, but maybe we'll just say stent. So I can say and try and say who is mentioning stent in title and abstract. Now I'm looking into my title and abstract and I get 61,000 patterns here with stent. Seems to be the better one to have a lot of results. I imagine that stents are mainly heart or always the same. There is one tool here, which is, there's 3 places we already put some AI in and we are moving forward with this other AI tools. Actually, I did a presentation yesterday on AI and the future, an overview of all the tools, where you can find related terms. And this is where you basically ask, what are the same words or what are the same things like whatever word you put in there. Like yesterday I said, what is artificial intelligence? I just put in artificial intelligence. Oh. And it gave me all these words which can define what is artificial intelligence. It's about deep learning, neural nets, and so on and so on. So it's the words that have the same context as your keyword. So it's like synonyms, but it's also related words. You could say a bit like, show me your friends and I tell you who you are, kind of. Because that's how you define. So here I could say stent as well and say stent. And it will say, well, stent can also be stents, can be about balloon catheter, medical device, stent graft, balloons. You see a little bit all these words. Now it's important you get these words because some of these patent lawyers, they just use difficult words to hide their patent, whereas here you can kind of expose these words and use them in your filter. If you like any, I could just say stent or stents, for example. I add that to filter, and from my 61, I get a few that only say stents. Let's have a look. How many will come? What's going on here? Sorry. I'll just do stent or stents like that. Same. Mainly same. I think when they say stent, they say stents. So this is, you can also go into your family. That's basically several patterns are taken and you can say only one per family. It will make your group a little bit smaller because sometimes, you know, the same pattern is taken, for example, in Europe or in the States. And then you can also do things like last 20 years. If you say, instead of show me, for example, here, the patterns between, say, last 20 years here, and it will give you only those from the last 20 years or last 10 years. Let me do the last 10. Now, in terms of group of number of patterns, anything goes until 100,000. When there's more than 100,000 pattern results, we block it for the analysis would become too complex and too long. But you know, it's very rare that you have a certain area you're looking for and you really want to look at 100,000. If you really do have to do more, you can always also group them into 2 groups of 100,000, for example, and then analyze them. But this is where I think most pattern tools end, where you get a list and you can go through the list view. List view can be interesting, not if you have 20,000, but if you only have like 10 results, you just want to read them, you can go through them. Now, the thing I told you about the data that will change is if you have here, for example, a Chinese patent, what you see is that you don't have the claims and description. Now, for today, if you want to go to the full claims and description, there is here a link to Espasnet. When you click on that, you basically enter Espasnet, in which you will find the claims and description. This is what will change by the end of the month. We will have integrated all this data also in our tool by then. But here you see you have the pictures here and so on in Espasnet for now. One tool also which is using AI, apart from the first one we said about this context words, is similar. So we're looking for, this is a patent, and there is about 50 similar patents, meaning all these, based on the content of this abstract, have similar, so you can see it's all stent stuff as well. And it's not on citations or anything, it's basically on the classification codes and the content of the patent. Okay, so we go back to our filter. Here also there is a little bell that says create alert. That could be for a user that says, you know, I'm working on this for a year. If there's any new patents arriving in the time of my project, please send me an email. So you can give a title here and a weekly or monthly alert, basically, and enter your email address. Then it will keep you updated with new patents in that area. Now, the main thing that we have basically developed is to go into a visualization tool. So if you see here, there's like a graph kind of visualization tool. And these ones, or the ones that we will explore today, is all ways of classifying this data in a, say, bibliographic way. You can find out who works in stents, for example, in academia or in companies, or codes. These are classification codes they class patents in, or in countries, and so on. And here even let me do a granted ratio of the applicants. And so whenever you click on any of those visualizations, they run, and when they're ready, they color. So for example, here you see you have a world map of the stents patents, and as today is pretty normal, most patents are taken here in China. You see here 4,000 patents, after which you have the US of 3,000 patents, and then Japan, which used to be the most patents before, and then you go to the other countries. Now, it's just a simple interface. If you want to know, for example, who in Australia is working on stents, you just click on the country and you get all these stents here explained with, you know, the patent description, the claims, and so on. And again, you have similar. You can also just ask for, and this is what we have as word clouds. Many of them are word clouds. Word clouds basically mean the more results, the more, the bigger the word. And you see here, you have, for example, 300 patents here, where in the small one you have only 21 patents. Now we can use this visualization also to combine things if they are the same. For example, if you see Medtronic here and Medtronic Vascular there, and you say, oh, these are actually the same company, you can just drag it and drop it, and you have Medtronic here, the 2-in-1. You see how we have in a word cloud the top 50 shown, but you can go to 100, 200, 250, 500 if you want to, or you can have a list view if you want to. Now, as you see, we have here company. We can also ask for academia. So these are all the universities and institutions. Or even you could say, let me see a graph between, on one side, the companies, and on the other side, the academics. In this way, you could see who is working with whom together. So the X and Y axis you can do with any kind of search. So we see here, for example, now in this visualization, that the University of Ulsan here works together with the Asan Foundation, or the Neural here, and so on. So these are all combinations. These graphs are active, so you can click on them and you can find then the patents which are in this group of hydrogel stents and so on, which is in there. So next to that, you can also do a granted ratio. This is basically asking how many patents, let me visualize it, for example, like this. So Cook Medical has asked or applied for 317 patents, and they got 220 granted. So you see that light zone is basically the total, including with this one, and then the dark zone is basically what they have already granted. Now you can see here a legend on the side. Legends basically make you or give you the ability to add or take away from your visualization. So you can click on what is interesting to you. Maybe there is a smaller player that you have interest in. You just click it and you add it to the group because you show the top ones, or maybe some of the big ones you don't want. You can just take them out or bring them in. So it's pretty easy to manage these graphs. After that, you have timelines, and timelines is anything which has to do with activity, or for example, an applicant timeline, or anything that you want to put in timeline. We'll show you some text analysis later. You can do it with that. Compare, I gave you an example of companies versus academia. You can also do, for example, trademarks versus companies, it's saying. So let me go back to timeline. Activity timeline is just showing you over the years how many there are. You can see it like that or see it in a kind of trend graph. And again, you can click on any of those if you want to see the last ones from last year. Just click on that visualization and you get these from last year's patents. Applicants is a search from applicant over time. So you see in the last 10 years, as we were looking for, who are the applicants, maybe better in a bubble chart like this, where you can see if the patents go up or down when they started. And again, you can click on any of those to see the last patents they had. You can also do a heat map if you prefer that. Heat map can sometimes be easier to put into papers, then you bring them together. If you change the size here, you see it will kind of make your graph however you want it fit in a research paper, for example. Applicant timeline, and then you have here an example of an XY, which is a on the y-axis here I have trademarks, whereas on the x-axis I have companies. So here you can choose, for example, Kevlar, and see that Kevlar is in a certain as a material here in Abbott, but also in BART and also in Boston Science and so on. So again, you just click on them, and then you can see in your patents here, you take your stent, including anti-migration capabilities. You want to know where is your Kevlar. You just click here on analysis terms, the ones that is in the search, and you will find Kevlar in there as an example. So then we have a series of mapping tools. Mapping tools is cartography of, for example, where they are, what are the fields, the elements, the technologies, and so on. They'll map a bit out what's there. And one I like a lot is also finding the competitor of a certain company. For example, I could say, show me the competitor of Medtronic, or maybe let me find something which has more than just stents. Terumo, for example, they're more of a needle company. Also a user of the software, actually. And then say, show me the competitors of Terumo in stents only in the patents of their filter. Okay. So I'm launching a few of those. So the first thing I've asked in the map is a code map. So a code map is, as you know, patents are classified in codes. Now here we build a grid because there's 250,000 codes in the system. We can make a grid of 500 by 500. So what did we do? 500 by 500 grids where A, B, C, all these classifications are, and where you can see the highlighting this kind of island system. Where are the most patents on stents? Now, once you have that grid, you can zoom in or zoom out. So you can go in detail, and every time you zoom in into an area, you will go from A to A51B or something, or A61I. So it will always make your code classification smaller and smaller until you go into the detail. Now, if you like any of those and you say, I want to see this part of the area, you just click on, or you drag and drop basically a frame on there, and you find the patterns which are in there. Now, this map also you could use to visualize things like, I want to see where there is a certain applicant. Say, where is my Medtronic vascular, for example. And then I want to compare it maybe with another player, say, oh, Medtronic is here as well. So if it's Medtronic and Medtronic, they're probably the same. So I don't want to compare those. Actually, I want to merge those. So I merge them together into one. And then I say I want to see, for example, a Terumo and where they are present. So you can visualize things like that on there. So then you can see the areas where one player is on or the other is on or where they're both on. That is a code map analysis. And you can also look into a domain map to see where the patterns of stents, they are mainly in areas like preparations for medical, but they're also in joining plastics areas. They're in knitting even areas, metal knitting probably. So these are the spraying parts, rotary piston. These are the parts where these patterns are classified, and we often use this from patterns of universities. Yes, there's a list of citations. I will come to that of patterns as it will be in the tool here in a citation search. Thank you. So this is just the domains. And then here, this is an example of fields. Now, fields, you look at thermal, mechanical, electrical, acoustic. Here, for example, ultrasound. If you want to know where they're mentioning ultrasound in the patterns, you basically get all the patterns that talk about stent, but with ultrasonic or ultrasound or ultra anything which is to do with ultrasonic. So as every of these tools is basically a slice and dice in the data in a visualization, and from there you actually go to the detail. So it's like a helicopter view, but then you descend onto the actual patterns in detail. Technologies here, I will go more in the text analysis. This is just showing you whether they are in chemistry or mechanical or mainly in medical technology, of course, as we are. And then there is visualizations like what are all the elements being used in a stent. So here you have just the table of Mendeleev, and you can see that what you see here is the number of patterns that have it, and of course the darker. So we see a lot of titanium, magnesium, and if I want to see, for example, which one is using gold here, 432 talk about gold, you just click on there, and you find all the stent patterns that mention gold, being gold plated or gold plating or any in their patterns, and then you just go in there and then find out, for example, here they talk about gold. In all of the searches, you have a setting here or configuration, and you can choose where you look. If you want to look only in title and abstract, or you want to look in the claims or in the description, you can choose, and once you do that, of course, every time you do that, it will be a different visualization depending on description, which is more the problem context, the claims, which are more the solution, and then the title and abstract, which are more of a summary. And then we go to my favorite part of the tool, and that is text analysis. Now, in text analysis, oh, I didn't show materials yet, I'm sorry. Materials here is a list of what are all the materials being mentioned in the patterns. This is a clustered list, but you can also have a list view like this. So what you see here is what are all the metals being used in our gold alloys. Here we're talking about earlier, titanium and so on. What are all the polymers? I see here PTFE as a first, which is Teflon. And then you can go and click on, for example, who is mentioning PTFE, Teflon, or polytetrafluoroethylene, just by clicking on them and finding where they mention it. So you see here, it's not PTFE, it's polytetra, it's written out, or you also have the highlight of Teflon, which is the brand, I believe, from Dupont. So that's materials. Competitors. Can be interesting competitors if you're a researching company and you say, show me all the closest competitors to this company. Actually, in business area, you could say if you find competitors of your clients, you find new clients. Or if you find competitors of your suppliers, you might find cheaper, better suppliers. So this is an example of competitors of Terumo in the area of stents. And we look at Cordis, for example, Abbott, and some of them that are also in our list, although this goes outside of your filter. There's only the patents that can do that. Give me a list of competitors of a certain company based on this activity. This is a very good thing that you can find in patent literature. And now again to my favorite part, which is the text analysis. So this is really where I think people can, and it's they're all, and most of these things are unique in our or exclusive in our tools. But this is where we can do some research and saying what are, for example, the type of stents present. And my background in research I used to do in Imperial College was about finding these text patterns that could work to find properties. And if I ask here for, it's only 4 simple things. First one is adjective. If I say adjective, it's basically stent. And then I put adjective stent like that. So to make it a formula, I put adjective Coulomb star stent. When I do that, and it's also in the slides, of course, when I do that, I have to enter it. Adjective Coulomb star stent, enter. And I ask, what are all the adjectives? Noun, which is the context, I ask. And I go for verb. I ask for the verbs, which are in the same sentence with stent. Go. Voilà. Now, these are 3 things that I can ask. And now let me have a look at the nouns in general as well. I can ask, for example, what are the main problems? Of course, because we are going through and all these searches through over 20,000 patents, this takes a bit longer than the other visualizations, but they're worth the wait. Components, for example. Yeah. So the first thing I've asked here was glossary. And glossary is basically what are all the abbreviations in stent patent literature. If they are abbreviated, we think they might be interesting enough to have an abbreviation. So here are the what you call glossary, and you see AAA, for example, is not alcoholic here. It's an abdominal aortic. Another one that I can't read. 48 patents. So if you think, oh, that's an interesting part, you click on it and you come into the patents that talk about this effect. Where here you see a lot of the materials as well, some of the technologies. So in general, I think it's not only to show off in the next meeting on stents, but you basically get some summary of what are technology and materials which are present in your filter. Now, if I go now to the text analysis, I've asked adjective stent, and what I see is first of all, there is things that I cannot use. For example, adjacent stent, I could say that's not really any information, or conventional either. So I have a little bin here where the things I don't like, I can just take them out quickly. Main, I can take out, for example. Outer, I can take out, or other, I can take out. But then when I see what's remaining, I basically get the difference between one stent and another expressed in these adjectives, because you have a self-expanding stent, which is different to a biodegradable stent, which is different to a uteral or drug eluting. So you see the differences here. And if you are a researcher in the area of stents, then you don't go for it, a 500 here and all the adjectives they use in front of stent. That might be interesting because the adjectives are basically what they use to express in patents what the differences are and why they should get it patented. And of course, anything that is interesting, for example, if you say, oh, I like this, say, self-expanding stent, you just click on it and you get all these patents that talk about self-expanding in there. So in the 4 words to remember, I think this is one, which is called adjectives. And the adjective is the property. And in general, any product, if you take a glass, you could say it's a hollow glass, a flat glass, a double glass, a gray glass, a transparent glass. Adjectives give you the difference between one glass and another. If it's about the context, it's, you know, it's a stent for the heart or for the artery or valve or metal. So we're asking for the nouns in front of them. There is a bit of overlap, but you know, better to have overlap than missing. But what you see here is, in general, what are all the context nouns that are in front of stent, hopper, lumen, and so on. Okay, and then you can also highlight things by color if you say, I am really wanting to look into this, say, balloon stent or catheter stent, and basically you highlight in different colors what you want. Or you can see if you can visualize the whole thing into more of a cluster. I prefer this, but you can move them around as well. You know, you could say, for example, I want this one to be here in the top there. So it's alphabetic by normal, but it's sometimes nice to group them into similar things, for example. So that's noun stent. So I would, if you can actually change your adjective stent here. I could say, actually, these are, and I call it stent properties. Whereas if I go here, I would call that stent functions. Sorry, stent context. Stent context. Like the nouns. Whereas if you go to the verbs, I've asked what are the verbs that are in the same sentence with stent. You see basically what are the main functions, what is happening. It's a stent that has been anchored, implanted, woven, stretched, deployed, crimped, deflated. See, all these words are basically the actual actions or functions related to stent. Go to top 500, you basically see all these things that happen to a stent or in a stent. So that is 3 of the very important Rosetta Stone kind of words to go from grammar to science, is that if we talk about science in general, it's all about the properties, as we say, the adjectives. If we talk about technology, it's all about the verbs, where it's about anchoring or cutting, drying, implanting, and so on. Whereas if we look at in which area, where do you actually apply these properties and functions, you apply them in a context of, for example, a body stent or a cardiovascular stent, and that's this context. There's one more that I haven't done, and that is another way to search text, is you can also search numbers. And numbers are things like if you want to see if there is any standards, say ISO and then number. I think, yes. And if you look at ISO numbers, that's one. I think the German one is DIN number, that's a norm, Deutsche Industrielle Norm. And then if you think in America, there's also this military standards. Now, I don't know if that would be present here in stents, but that's mil-star. So what I'm doing here is mil-star is basically everything that starts with mil minus, and I can ask that as a search. Now this star, this wildcard question, you can also do opposite. You could say, I want everything which ends with 3 or less. So then I get all the words that end with 3 or less. star free star less. So what do I get to see here in my text analysis is in the ISO numbers I've asked, and you get a few here which say ISO number 10,000 and so on. So no DINs, no mil, but there is a few ISOs. Now, again, here you have your ISO numbers. Anything that you want to do over a XY comparison, I could say, well, I want to know which company is actually mentioning which isonorm. So I get company on the x-axis and I get my isonorm. And how did I did my isonorm? I said ISO space number and enter that. And I say, okay, let me see what comes out. And it makes an X, Y graph with that. When I ask for less, what I get is words like, a lot of it I cannot use here, like nonetheless. So sometimes I just go to the top 10 because they are often the main words that I don't want, because nonetheless and nevertheless I don't want. Harmless, maybe. Wireless, yes. So what it does now is it looks for the words that end with less, which can be, for example, or free, polymer free, or sutureless, stepless, stentless. And this is sometimes interesting in the method to have a look at what are they taking out, drug free, and so on. Is that the text pattern? Just like our text pattern, we've asked for ISO versus company here. So we have on one side the isonorms, on the other side the companies, and you can see who is mentioning which isonorms, like this, or in a heat map like that. So this is a text analysis. I furthermore opened problems, which looks a bit for problems. What are the safety, health, and so on problems that they are identifying? But you can do all these things also with, excuse me, text analysis. You know, you could just ask something like, what are the problems, by saying noun, problem, for example, and finding out what problems are mentioned. In this way, you could also ask, what is it about convenience or easy to verb? So what is it easy to open, close, cool, implant? So I'm just asking these patterns. So a lot of creativity possible there in how you formulate your text pattern, and then how you take that out of a certain area. I looked at, for example, replacing a aluminium foil in a packaging yesterday, and all I was looking for is replace aluminium, and then look at where else and what they replaced it for example. So it can be very specific. Here, as you see, easy to degrade, implement, install, operate, popularize, manufacture, and so on. Whereas my noun problems, look, there's quite a few here which are about scheduling or technical or clearance or energy problem. If you go all the way, you might realize or recognize, I mean, some problems, and say who is working on that. So in the same way with an XY graph, you could say which company is working on which problem. Could also be interesting to see. So that's text analysis. Now let's go to units. Units, or what is measured. I say what gets measured gets done. In a way, here you basically look at different text analysis things, even here, like volume flow rate, for example. So what it does, this analysis, is, first of all, I'm looking at the main units in these patterns. They're about size, time, pressure, temperature. So you see what is mentioned. And then you can go in detail into these. So if you say, oh, show me, for example, where they talk about certain temperatures, and you have a linear or logarithmic scale here, and you say, I want to go the ones that talk about 1 to 10 degrees, for example, and you will go into the patterns in which these temperatures of 1 to 10, being 4 degrees Celsius here, are mentioned. So it basically takes all your patterns and classifies them in volume flow rate. Didn't even know that was a unit, but basically volume flow rate is how much and maybe in America, because this is cubic meter per second, but you could say gallons per minute, if that's more American, for example, and then say, okay, update my graph and take all the ways the volume flow rate is expressed, convert it to gallons per minute, and then I go for 1 to 10 gallons per minute. And what you get here is all these results, where in the patent you will see there is these volume flow rates here in liter per minute, but it's converted to gallons, and here again in liters per minute. You can see them. So units are also very nice to basically select a group of patents which you are interested in, and then take those and bring them in the briefcase, which I will talk about at the end. Now, after units, you have tools which have to do with innovation logic. Now, with innovation logic, you have a patent value here and self and evolutionary potential. Let me launch that, but open it in a certain way. See the settings, and here I need stent. Here, update. So imagine I'm a student, I have a work to do about stents, but I don't really know what's going on in stents. My first time I'm looking at stents. Actually, it is also part of my background. I used to do, in my materials background, anything which was biomaterials for implants and so on. So a nice field, I think. And here, what it says is, what's going on in this area of stents? It's about increasing configurations, flexibility, balloon strength, and so on. About decreasing cost, damage, blood flow, stenosis, whatever that is, and so on. And then it's about stabilizing the catheter or patient or the vascular patient and so on. So basically, it shows a little bit what's going up, down, or being stabilized. And again, you just click on that and you can find which ones are talking about decreasing damage. Now, in the same way, we make a value equation, a bit like what Clayton Christensen used to call performance, reliability, convenience, price, why people buy products. We say things are either performance, so what is the stent to do? It's about force, it's about pressure, it's about rate, probably of the position and so on. These are the performance part. Harm would be what can be negative, so it's about environmental friendly or prosthetic heart valve, or the risk, or any things which are here with the free. Remember that we looked at the free parts. Interface is really about easy to implement, to manufacture, or even better, self-expanding, self-this. And cost could be about, the cost, the production efficiency, or the drug cost, or anything like that. So again, it makes you these values of more good, less bad, easier, cheaper in your stent. And now to go back to also what Wanda was mentioning in the chat, looking at some of the values of the patents in terms of how many citations do they have, how recent they are, and how big the family is. And for example, if I take a patent which seems to be quite high value here from Terumo on a stent, I click on the patent, and what I get is the actual patent here with the claims and the description and beautiful stent here, beautifully done. But I have a place where I can ask for Citation Explorer here on the top right. And what I get then is a map of where is my patent and what are all the people actually citing this patent. And here being 50 that actually already, or 51 that actually talk about this patent, means this patent is pretty interesting. You can click on those and find or see the actual patent. You can also navigate through the years here, because citations can help you doing that, or you can import some of them in your filter. So actually, if you look here, citations are also mentioned in the patent. So here you have, for every patent, you have claims, description, citation, and family. Family is basically the group of patents that are from Terumo again in different places or countries or whatever the family of this patent, where citations are backwards. What is this patent referring to? So it's referring to these patents before it can actually claim the novelty that they have. Whereas people doing that in the future about this patent are mentioned here. So that's after basically this patent was granted. Some other people talk about it here. So it's a nice thing to see going from here to there to the next one, because it's almost like you find an evolution line of where it goes. And talking about evolution, here is actually how it's been applied. And then you see here the link to Espasnet if needed. And then here, publication when it was granted, and things like that, and are shown application and priority dates. So I hope that answers your question on where to find citations and where to visualize them. We also looked in value equation here on interface, a lot of self. One of the searches is actually self. What are all the self words? Because they're pretty good when you look at what you want to do in your, remember your verbs, your functions. If I go back to what are the main functions of a stent, we get these verbs here, which are about binding, expanding, elongating, implanting. All of these words, imagine if you could put self in front, that would be easier. You know, it's a self-implanting, self-anchoring, self this, self that. So we're looking for these kind of words by asking a text pattern from auto or self-expanding, see, self-expanding, self-polymerizing, self-positioning. You could have a self-anchoring here, which is not there, but could be in the future. Ah, there is, look, self-anchoring. So an interesting exercise to find out what are all the possible things that go from themselves out of these patterns. And then finally, one more example of visualization here is evolutionary potential. This is where we look at in which direction does the stent evolve? What kind of parameters do they work on? If, for example, I look into, going a bit slower, whilst it's opening, I wanted to say one more thing here, which is important, is called briefcase. And briefcase is basically a way to take data and bring it into a briefcase so that from your 20,000 patents, for example, you have a selected set of, say, 5,000. And if you like those more, you can then use these 5,000 to bring a new report open and start again, and then visualize exactly what you want to see. Now, this is not normal. This visualization goes a bit slower. I will just do an F5 and see if that does it for me. Normally it opens immediately. You'll see also that the speed of the tool will go a bit faster wherever you are, because I am here on satellite. But what you see here is the stent is basically working a lot on the surface of the stent, on the fibers, the fiber strength here of the line, some on integration, a lot on the shape, some porosity here. And you could say, oh, that's interesting. I want to see where they work on porosity. Is there something like a porous or a hollow stent or a cavity stent? So this is where cavity is actually been taken as a word, as a property, where actually it should not be, because it's more like what we want for is porosity, for example. Whereas the cavity is probably where the stent is going, rather than a cavity in the stent, what we would look for. So that's a bit like the blue stuff is where they are doing things, and then the white stuff is where they could still go. So to finalize, so what we've done here is a whole list of visualizations to then work on. And imagine that you can only use it in the library, but then you want to use it later. What you can do is you can save this report, and I save this report as stent save, and then I can share this report with people by making it, for example, in a team, private or public. And I have here a public share, for example, share that like this. And then this visualization basically can be shared with anybody through the link. Another way of sharing is that you could say, I want to make a presentation. So I want to export this into PowerPoint. So what it does is you select all the slides you want and you go to a PowerPoint. You could also choose to export to Excel all the patent numbers with or without anything else. I'm not going to do that now because that's a lot of exporting. So you can basically also visualize it through Word if you want, and you could say I would take a certain patent or a group of patents and I want to export them. I do mostly export a patent to a PowerPoint, then I just have the title, the abstract, and the picture, and I use that in my presentations, but you can go to Word as well, and it will ask you what you want to export parts of the patent. So this, I think, is an overview of what you can do with it. I'm going to go back to the dashboard here. So these are basically all your visualizations. And actually, if I go into the chat now and I share this link with you, you should be able to open that. And here we are in the chat. Open that link. Oh, and I see there's some things I haven't read in the chat. Sorry. I need a handout. Okay, thank you, Sunshine. Can I look up patents from University of Minnesota? Yes. Can we browse, or is that analyzing, or is it more analyzing on topics? Oh, okay, yes, you can. So you can start. Do I still have you on audio?
Battery 100%.
Okay, sorry, I was out of audio there for a second. So if anybody asked me something that I missed, sorry. So just to say, Minnesota, if you want to go for University of Minnesota, the first thing you have to do, and what we often do with patents of university, is finding out what are the application areas for these patents, to find out partners for eventually sponsoring or buying or licensing the technology out. So what I can do is I can go to a new report here, and I want to find now what is the name of the applicant University of Minnesota. It's very different sometimes. So I think what I would search for is UNIF, for example, and Minnesota, for example, these words, and then look into applicant, and I add that to filter. So what I get is UNIF Minnesota, and I get 7,000 patents here from the university. So that could be a start. If you say you want to browse now through these patents, again, you can do it in different ways. You can just browse one by one, and you will see, even though this says Boston Science and so on, it will be Minnesota and Boston. So Minnesota will always be in the applicants. Now, to browse through these patents, you could also start and say, oh, I would like to know actually who are the main inventors within the university that are, so you can click on inventors here and find them. You can find, for example, which are the companies that are patenting together with Minnesota University, and you just ask for a group of patents. And all these mapping tools then say a bit in which domains they are. Maybe they're mentioning what industry they're in. So I would say, if you go for a text pattern and you say noun industry, you could find in which industries, for example, they are patenting. So what I see here is these are the people who are inventing the most. I have Bruce Blazar here. Bruce Blazar is from University of Minnesota and has quite a list of patents here, or patent documents here on his name. So that is 141, and you can go all the way down to your top 500 here patents. Maybe that's also a nice interface for people when you send a report like that and you say, look, this is the top inventors, or I think here you could go to a list view and then go by patent number. And you see that Bruce is then feeling the breath of Wang in his neck in the race here of more patents. Then it's on the third place, we have Frank Bates and so on. So, and that might be interesting for them if it's a bit of competition talk, but at the same time, that could bait them into using the tool and finding out, look, who is working here? So you could say, hey, wait, which inventor is actually working with which company? So again, you could say these are your researchers on the x-axis, which are your inventors. And then you have your company here, which is your XY graph. So that could be a way of browsing industries. You see that you're working in electronics industry, food industry, chemical industry. So you see a little bit in what industries mainly you're having your 7,000 patents, when they actually mention, of course, the industry in your in the patent, or you could say who's working on which elements. Now, what we also did once today, universities is looking at the problems and said, just for a professor in Belgium and say, oh, you're the expert in xenolase inhibitors, whatever that is. Do you think anybody else in the university is working on that? And he said, yeah, no, I wouldn't know because I'm the reference professor in that field. And then by using the patents, we identified there was another area, but he was doing it in the food, but in the medical area, they were also working on xenolase inhibitors, and that was 2 buildings from him. And they were trying to solve the same problem. So can we actually try and see how we can connect people working on similar problems by using this patent database? Also, it could also be almost like a yellow pages for Minnesota University to know who knows something about whatever. And if I look here, I'm just going to do a self-analysis as an example, because I remember we used to do a project once for a Goodyear tire company, and we gave them a patent which was solving a problem. I said, oh, that's great. This is a fantastic solution. It's a pity it's already patented. From who is the patent? And we say, it's from you, it's from Goodyear. Oh, great, we can use it. It's not always easy to know what you know if you have 20,000 patents on the name of the company. Whereas here, you could imagine that some student wants to work on, for example, self-assembly, and says, oh, who knows something about self-assembly or self-cleaning, wants to make something self-cleaning. You could say, okay, these are the people, 27 patents. So these are the people in my university that know something about self-cleaning coatings. So if I then go to from the University of Minnesota, there is some people here, and then I click here on LinkedIn and I find this person and I can work with that person within the university. So that is also possible to use this basically as a contact database. We even had some people in the hemp industry say we use now to find members for our association, because we can find all the people in this country that are busy in the hemp industry for clothing or automotive or whatever. So yeah, that's a bit of the visualization. I hope this also helps here. I can save this one. You can actually also make that quite easily, but this is Minnesota, save. And then I choose which visualization here. I take the visualization of the dashboard. And again, I can